What is up, everyone? I hope you're all good. Now, a question that comes up quite a lot in the comments, and also it came up a lot when I was working in the shop, was how do I prepare my plants for planting? Now, it's not just a simple case of getting them home and chucking them in. There is a little bit more work to it than that. Especially if you want to give your plants the best start and you want to succeed with your aquarium plants, there are a few steps to start or do first before actually getting them in your aquarium. So when buying aquarium plants, they come in a few different formats. You get things like potted, you get things like Invitro, you also get things like bunched and loose. Now, bunched and loose are fairly easy because, well, all the cleaning's done for you. There's no rock wool, there's no pot, there's no gel that you're going to have to worry about washing off. It's pretty much ready for you to go. So you can skip the next few steps that I'm going to talk about and go pretty much towards the end. This video couldn't have come at a better time because I was just literally sort of finishing off thinking about what I wanted to say in this video and all the information I wanted to get, and I had a knock on the door and the delivery driver turned up with my brand spanking new box of plants. So a big shout out to Aquafleur because they have sent me the plants for the next like 2 or 3 scapes on my channel. So yeah, really chuffed and really happy with that. So big thanks to you guys. The first one we're going to start with is the one that's gaining popularity in the hobby, which is the Invitro pots. These are probably the cleanest way to buy plants because they are grown in lab settings. There is no pests, no snails, no nothing, or at least it shouldn't be if they're grown correctly. These are the easy grows from Aquafleur, so I've visited the lab over there. It's such a cool place, and the guys and girls that work in there are just, well, the work that goes into it is insane. And these are probably the easiest to sort out. They're a little bit simpler than the potted plants. Right, so we've got our jug, and we've got several of the easy grow plants. Now, one thing I would say about Invitro plants is when you go to the shop, it honestly looks like a potted plant is more valuable than an Invitro plant. I can promise you there'll be probably about 30 stems in this pot, whereas there's only 8 or 9 in that. So swings and roundabouts, and like I say, you do get a cleaner plant. It may be smaller for the starting of your tank, but eventually it's going to grow up real quick and you've got a lot of quantity in there. So to prep the Invitro plants, all we're going to do, remove the label. Now, they do tell you on the inside literally how to do it, but I know how to do it. It's fine. We're going to take the lid off, and then we've got the plant. Now, in the bottom, obviously, you won't be able to see, but there is this weird, like, slimy, gooey gel. And all we're going to do is we are going to wash that off. Now, I'd probably recommend you do this under your sink because it will be way easier than do it in a jug, and you can make sure it's running away. But for this works perfectly. So you can see I've just washed all the gel off there. There's hardly anything, I say hardly anything, there's nothing left on there of that liquid solution, and that's ready to go. Now, this would be divided into several pieces eventually, but we're going to do that when we've got the other plants washed and prepped. Now, I'm not actually going to use the Helianthemum today, but I am going to use the Limnophila, which I think is an interesting one for you lot to see, because this will be jam-packed full of plants. Now, again, it is the simple thing of taking the label off, removing the lid, and then getting out that main bulk of plant. Sort of see the liquid in the bottom there. That's going to be that nutrient-rich liquid, and we don't really want that in the fish tank. So again, it is just a simple case of giving it a wash, and away we go. As much as I was saying that potted plant looked like it was better value for money, each one of these is an individual stem of Limnophila, and you can see there is tons. Probably 20, 30 stems that we can divide out in there. So as much as, yes, the other one is taller, this is going to give us more plants. Fresh jug of water for these plants. And I've got several different types of potted plant. What I'm hoping to do is cover the different types of plants that you would get and sort of how they divide themselves when you get them out of the pots. There will be exceptions to this rule, but I'm hoping to cover the majority in this video. To start off, we'll just pick one out, so I think we'll start with the Hygrophila, because this is one of my favourite plants, to be honest. So this is Hygrophila rose australis, and it's those sort of pinky red tips that I just absolutely love. Anyway, to get these prepped, obviously we're going to remove the label, we're going to give it a squeeze. Now, you will get water everywhere. If you've got a shelf like me that you don't mind getting wet, that's fine. That's the pot and the basket. That is literally only used for growing the plant in. And then from here, you're literally going to get rid of as much of this rock wool as you can without damaging the plant. So if you gently sort of start teasing it apart, you'll end up with several little groups of plants. So there you go, you can see I've already got 3 groups of plants. There's like 3 stems in each one. From here, we've just got to clean them off. So gently teasing them out. If you lose some of the roots, it's not the end of the world, but that gets the majority of the rock wool off. And we do that for the other 3. Now what you can see is we're left with a little bit on these plants, but stem plants are quite easy. You can just sort of get it off and tease all the rock wool out of the roots. Some plants are a little bit trickier, which I'll show you in a minute. But essentially, these are now ready to rock and roll. So next up we'll go with the crypt, because these can be a little bit tricky. You can see the roots are growing through the bottom there, and crypts are a bit of like a clump forming plant. So they end up being a bit more harder to get the rock wool off of the roots sometimes. So again, we're just going to remove the pot. Crikey, yeah, look, you can see the roots there already. And again, we're just going to remove this rock wool, get rid of it all. And you can see on this one, it's all stuck in amongst here. And it's quite tricky to get it all out. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to sit this one in this water. Now this is slightly warm water, and that will soak for a little bit just to loosen up that rock wool. While we're waiting for that one to soak, we'll unpot the other 2. So we've done a stem plant, we've done a clump forming plant. The next plant on the list is a plant that grows on runners. So this is a liliopsis. So you can see these little runners here. This is how the plant grows. So again, it's the same sort of thing. Squeeze, pull the plant out, get rid of the label. Now actually, there you go. So this is growing through the side of the pot already. That is actually a plant. So you can see how it grows on a runner there. That could be planted and that will grow. Sorry if the camera's moved slightly, I had to change my battery. But yeah, as I was saying, each one of these little bits that's coming off is in theory a plant. You can see the roots there. So runner forming plants are very easy to divide, but you can go too far because obviously planting individual blades of grass like that would take you an absolute age. You can do it, I just haven't got the time for it. So again, we're going to clean all the rock wool off of here. Now these are tricky because they've got finer roots. And obviously, like I say, you don't mind damaging a few roots, but you just don't want to rip all the roots off. So I just tease those out of there. Look. Wow, look at that. Okay, you can see that one. But yeah, so we're just going to tease all this rock wool off. This one's coming up quite clean. Sometimes these plants hang on to the rock wool and you can't get it off. But this one isn't too bad. There we go. Right. So there's our clump of liliopsis. Lastly, we've got an epiphyte. So epiphytes are another one that like to grab hold of the rock wool. And this is a bulbitis. So this is like an African fern. Really nice little plant. I like these a lot. Very hardy and very low light demanding. But again, we're going to do the same thing. Give it a squeeze. Pull this off. Now, you can hear the roots. Well, you might not have heard it, but the roots were ripping there. That's just where it's growing through the pot. Again, nothing to worry about. Label gone. And epiphytes can be one of the hardest ones to do because they do grab hold of the rock wool. There you go, look. And again, don't worry too much about damaging the roots, but we are going to have to clean some of this rock wool off because it is stuck to the roots like this. This is going to be another one that we're going to have to soak, unfortunately. Oh my word, it is stuck. Right. Without damaging the main plant, I think that's all I can do. Let's get these 2 into soak, and we'll give them a bit of a comb in a minute, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Now these plants have been soaking for a few minutes, we'll do the crypt first because that one's been soaking the longest. And what we're going to do is the last of this rock wool that you can see on here, we're just going to comb out with a pair of tweezers. You can use a fork works well. My forks are downstairs and I can't be bothered to go downstairs, so I'm going to use my trusty tweezers. So all we're going to do is where you see all this rock wool that's caught up in the plant at the bottom, we're just going to take it and we're just going to gently comb it all out. So if you go around, and essentially you're just trying to remove the most of it. If there's the odd bit left, it's not the end of the world, but you do want to remove as much of it as possible. That way, you're starting with the cleanest plant possible. There we are, you can see what we scraped out of it. Like I say, it's not a great deal. There's a few roots and an old leaf that's come off. But yeah, that is ideal really. And we'll show you dividing these in a minute because that plant there can be divided into several plants. Next up, we've got the bulbitis. And again, it is just the same process. All we're going to do is just comb out a lot of this rock wool. Now, epiphytes being epiphytes, they love to hang on to rock wool. So this one's going to be a bit trickier, but it's just the same process. And there we are, that's our bovitis, all cleaned and prepped and ready to go. Look at the colour of that water, and obviously all the bits that I got off as well. You don't want that hanging around in your aquarium, it's just going to make your tank messy for no reason. So before moving on to the next step, we should probably discuss pests, because pests can sometimes come in on your new plants. The main culprit that comes in on new plants is the snail. Now for me, I don't mind snails because in all honesty, they only explode in population when you have excess food in the aquarium. So if you do get a snail explosion, it's probably best looking at your feeding regime or your cleaning regime, because in all honesty, there is probably something going on that means the snails have got an excess of food that they can feed off of. After your plants have sat in the shop for a few days, they might have a few pest snails on them. Obviously, a lot of shops don't use pesticides and things like that through fear of causing problems with your fish, or your snails, or your shrimp for that matter. But it is well worth taking a little bit of time just to check your plants over. There might be eggs on there might be snails on there, but you're just checking the undersides of the leaves for any jelly-like substances. Don't get too hung up on checking because, like I say, they are a good indicator as to whether your tank has excess food, excess nutrients, excess algae, because that's the only way that a population of snails is going to explode. Now the next step that some people will take is things like crypts are notorious for melting. Now obviously all of these plants will have been grown terrestrially, so all these leaves that you see here have been grown out of water. Some plants adapt quicker than others. Things like your stem plants will generally adapt quite quickly and not worry. Things like your crypt might melt back to pretty much nothing, and you might end up with just this root ball sat in the bottom of your tank for a few weeks until it reshoots. Now for me, I don't cut anything back, I just leave it. I could cut the roots there, and I could cut all the leaves there. That is something that some people will do. I leave it. If these leaves start to melt, I'll get them out. But some of them convert, so I just leave it. I think it looks nice for the first few weeks, and as long as you're on top of cleaning and removing any dead leaves, it doesn't cause too much of a problem. I just had to come back to the pest segment quickly because remember, all the Invitro easy grow stuff will not have any snails on it at all. Lab grade, no pests, no algae, so if you are worried about getting any snails in your tank, the potted Invitro plants probably are the way to go. We're now at the point where we need to divide the plants because they're clean, they're ready to go. Now some of them, just taking them out of the rock will divide the plants. So each of these are an individual stem. So each one of those is an individual plant that you will plant out. Plants that grow on runners might need a little bit of teasing apart. So you could, in theory, like I said earlier, where was that plant gone? There it is. So you could go down to this far. You could literally, each blade of that is a new plant that will start growing and rooting. If you've got the time, go for it. If you haven't, do what I do and just break them into a few little bite-sized clumps, because that way you can pop that in, it will start sending out runners and it will fill in eventually. Next up is your clump forming stuff. So this is like the crypt, sometimes echinoduris as well, but Amazon swords need to be a lot bigger. Hang on, I've got one actually. So this is an Amazon sword. What one is this? Ocelot green. So you can see there's two crowns. So I'd divide them two up because they're going to split apart quite easily, I would recommend. Yeah, definitely, they'd split up quite simply. But if you've just got those singular crowns, I wouldn't split the crowns until the plant is much more mature because you do run the risk of damaging the plant. But when you look at the crypts, you can see each of these, again, is an individual root. So you can go in here and just gently tease the plant apart. Again, you might lose a few leaves, you might lose a few roots, but you can just gently tease them apart and you end up with more plants. And again, you could go really far. So if I take this one off here, that there is an individual plant. So you can see the crown of the plant and the new leaves coming through. That is as far as you could go. You could go down to all of those. So that would be probably, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 plants. But for me, I just do it in clumps again. Next up is epiphytes. Now, epiphytes can be divided. I've got another one here that I'll show you in a second. But you can see that main green root here is the main root, and that's what you would have to cut to divide this. So you could separate out the plant leaves and cut right down that center, cut the rhizome in half. I think rhizome's the right name for it. Cut that in half and you would have two plants. Most of the time I leave my epiphytes as one clump because I just worry that I'm going to damage them, to be honest. They're quite a slow growing plant and it takes them a while to get there, so I don't always divide them. But if you look at things like this Bucephalandra I've got here, and this stands for things like Anubiases and Java ferns and all of that sort of stuff, you can actually see this one here is growing its own little root. So cutting that one off there and dividing that, as long as you're dividing it and it's keeping that root, you would be able to divide it quite easily. Now, I think that's the main groups of plants. You've got stuff that grows on runners, so all of your carpeting plants, things like vallis and stuff like that you can break into clumps. You've got your stem plants that should divide up quite easily anyway. You've got your clump forming, which is going to be your crypts and your echinoduris and things like that. And then you've got your epiphytes, which, like I say, are going to grow on a main root. Fairly simple. Now, one thing I want to show you is how much plant we get out of that. So this limnophila has come out of one of the Invitro pots. And like I say, if I start tearing this into clumps, it'll be the easiest place to start. But look at that, look how many stems there are. You're already quids in for the amount of stems that are in there. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in that little clump, and I've got all of that to go. There was only 9 in that pot. So yes, it's going to be shorter for a little bit of time, but what you're going to find is it's got a better start in life because it's got that nutrient-rich substrate that it's been growing in, and also you've just got more plant, you've got more stems, so it is going to grow way better. Now, like I say, you could go extreme and just literally take each one of these stems out. If I pull that one out, that is an individual plant. I very rarely go that extreme because I just can't be bothered, but if you've got the time, then literally pulling each of these apart into an individual stem and then getting your tweezers and planting that stem in your substrate is going to give you a bigger, thicker plant because it's going to give more space for the plants to grow. Now, I thought I'd finish this video just by showing you how to plant them quickly. I'm not going to go full in depth into this because there's all sorts about substrates and plants and all sorts of stuff that I'd like to cover, but I've just cleared this area in the front of this tank so I can give you a bit of a view of how to plant them. Now, I'm going to be using tweezers because honestly they make life so much easier. Now, starting off with the stem plant, this is the Hygrophila rose australis. What you could do with this is you could divide it even further. So each one of these leaf nodes, you could trim it there, and each stem and each set of leaves will shoot new plants. I'm not going to do that. I would probably, if I was actually planting this into a tank, I'd probably take it in half because every time you prune it like that, new shoots will come out of these nodes. So you could do that. I'm just going to show you how to plant this one. All you would do, grab hold of your stem, like so with your tweezers, and then plant it into the tank. So all we'll do is we put it into the tank. Now, obviously a stem plant wouldn't go at the front of the tank, but just give it a little wiggle so it gets down into the sand. Now, sometimes I'll open and shut my tweezers a little bit, so then it just locks itself into the sand, and then you can remove your tweezers. And that's it, that is the stem plant planted. Some can be a little bit trickier, so things like your little grass plant here, the Liliopsis, you would just grab a clump of that, and get that one again pushed down into the substrate. Give it a little wiggle to make sure all the sand or substrate sort of forms around it, and then you can lift your tweezers out. You can always sort of push a little bit of sand up and around it, but again, it's fairly easy. The finer rooted plants can be tricky because obviously they've not got much to them. Lastly, we'll cover the crypt. So again, these have been divided up into a lot of different plants now. We're just going to grab it, pop it in. Now, probably looking at how long those roots are there, I would have probably trimmed those roots down, to be honest, because a few of them are going to stick out the substrate. But again, little wiggle, get him in, and you're done. Don't know if I'm going to be able to get some sand around him. There we go. And that's it, as simple as that. Now, one last thing to mention after planting those plants is things like your epiphytes. Now, your epiphytes do want to grow on something, a rock, a piece of wood, an ornament, whatever you decide. Whether you want to glue it, whether you want to tie it on with some fishing line, whether you want to use like a cable tie like me, totally up to you. As long as it's secured onto something, it will grow onto it. I did have a video that I made a big planted, well I say big, a decent planted piece of bogwood, so you can go check that video out if you want to see how I attached all those plants to that piece of bogwood. I hope this has all made sense to you and it makes propagating and dividing and prepping your plants for your aquarium way, way easier. I've now got to go and find space for all these plants because in theory I didn't actually need to unpot these today. But we'll go and find some spots in different tanks to put them in. I'm sure it'll be fine. So yeah, hope it's been useful. I will see you in the next one.